the Evolution Security Podcast. Hey everybody, welcome to the Evolution Security Podcast. We are so stoked that you took your time to spend with us, listen to us on the road as you're commuting or as you're working, or you actually spend time sitting down and listen to us. Whatever you do, thanks so much for listening to us. Now, we've got a kick-ass show. We've had a fun pre-talk here. Pre-show, we've got some major kindred spirits going on between the three of us here. But before we go too far, I'm just going to throw this over to my brother for an intro to our awesome guest.
Awesome. Well, first off, Aaron Jannetti, that is, not my brother, Aaron. So back and forth, Aaron, we'll have to make sure that we keep that straight. I don't think it's going to be a problem, though. But Aaron, this is a long time coming. And first I'll say I first learned of you from Craig Douglas. I was listening to Craig on a podcast one time. I think you and I, at the summit, which we're going to talk about a little bit too, we decided that it was probably about a couple of years ago, maybe max 3 years ago, something like that. And, those of us that have all trained with Craig Douglas of ShivWorks, when Craig speaks, you listen. And when he mentioned your name, I immediately looked you up and started following a lot of what you're doing. And so, again, this is a long time coming. Welcome to our show. Aaron Jannetti of Knife Control Concepts. How are you doing, buddy?
I'm great, man. I'm great. Yeah, I think you're right. I think it was about 3 years ago, if I remember correctly, because it was very quickly after the first time I actually met Craig in person. And I did one of his courses down in Charlotte, and then jumped into one of his ECQCs in Ohio. And that's when the first time I was shocked, because I think I heard the same podcast where he was like, you got to give this young guy, Aaron Jannetti. And I was like, oh crap, he's talking about me. So, but yeah, man, it's been a long time coming for sure. So I'm looking forward to it.
Well, of course, we just met recently. Again, I had been following you for a few years, and I had the pleasure of taking your module at the Combatives Summit, which was, our audience members are probably going, man, when are we going to get off this Combatives Summit discussion? But really, there were so many people that we met there, trained under like you, that there's just so much incredible content to talk about. The Combatives Summit is here to stay. And so, yes, your module was using clothing to partly control the knife fight and whatnot, which we'll talk about here in a second. But before we get too far, Aaron, for our audience members that may not know you, there's a lot of our audience members that should. But for those that don't know you, go ahead and give us a bio, buddy.
Sure. Yeah. So I primarily run a training center. I'm actually in it right now. I finished teaching classes just a little bit ago, but I run a training center in Columbus, Ohio. And we specialize in self-defense, fitness. We do JiuJitsu, everything that goes there. But I started on this whole entire journey back in 2008. I found a Krav Maga gym. I started taking Krav Maga classes. That quickly led me to jiu-jitsu and kickboxing. From there, quickly led me into the firearms world. Started training a ton of firearms, and I was young enough, dumb enough, and didn't have enough bills that I could drop out of school and essentially pursue this full time at a very young age for very little money. And that was a blessing, because it gave me an opportunity to train with a lot of people in a lot of modalities, from pragmatic to maybe not so pragmatic. But it's given me a lot of exposure. So I've been doing this full time. Yesterday was 16 years since I walked through the doors of Ohio Krav Maga. February 6, 2008. I'll remember it every year. It was a huge change for me. So Nowadays, primarily a lot of people, at least on the internet, they know me from my previous program, which is the Active Shooter Response Program that I ran for quite a while and wrote a book called How to Survive an Active Killer, or Knife Control Concepts, which is the program I spend the majority of the time traveling around the country teaching now. So it's kind of a three-parter as far as, we have a training facility here in Central Ohio. I travel around with the Knife Control Concepts program. I have a book I wrote a couple of years ago. But I always tell people, primarily, I'm a father, I'm a husband, and I'm a constant student. I think that's one of the beautiful things about what we do. And, you mentioned the Combatives Summit was the opportunity to not only teach and put some stuff out in front of a huge group of awesome people, but also get the opportunity to train with people that I've been dying to train with for years and have them all in one place, which was absolute insanity of the best way. So yeah, long story short, I'm a full-time coach, travel around the country, doing the best I can to give the best information possible for terrible situations.
Well, that's awesome. And frankly, the other attribute of yourself is you're also a very humble person too. When I first met you down at the summit, it was very, very palatable, how humble that you are and how kind you are, which is in my opinion, a bedrock of a superb instructor. And you are, by the way.
I appreciate that.
And again, like I mentioned before, again, Craig mentioning you that time, I knew that you were somebody I wanted to look up. Now what we got to do is get it worked out. We're hosting you here. That's going to work out. That's going to work out for certain.
Heck yeah.
And Lee King, my jiu-jitsu instructor, if you're listening to this, we got to have Aaron to the gym. Aaron, what you got, buddy?
I just want to interject that I'm stoked to have you on, Aaron. That's Aaron Jannetti. I'm going to get confused who I'm talking to. Just kidding.
Call me Jannetti. Are we good to go?
Hey, so for me, I'm glad to have you on because Eric has about 30 times the combatives experience that I do. Eric and I, when it comes to at least pistol, we're pretty darn close, maybe neck and neck. I think he's a bit better than me. He sometimes argues with that, but either way, that's my expertise. But man, when it comes to knife stuff, that scares the crap out of me.
Yeah.
So I'm just stoked to learn from you. So from me, thanks for coming on, man. I'm looking forward to hearing some of this stuff and some of the stuff I looked at on YouTube of you. I was just like, holy crap, this is some good shit.
Awesome, man. I appreciate it. Thank you for having me.
Well, Aaron, so what is KCC? Give our audience a primer on that. I know that's a lot.
It's $1 million question. Yeah.
Yeah.
So KCC, Knife Control Concepts, is it's a program that actually has 3 of us. I started it back in 2019. And then since then, was blessed to bring on Mike Cheney, who is actually the black belt I train under for jiu-jitsu. Really good friend of mine. He also is the head of the program here at Endeavor in Ohio. And then also Eli Knight, who's an absolute genius when it comes to the grappling side of things. But in short order, KCC is the program we developed to start teaching people how to train for knife defense situations. Coming up early on as a Krav Maga instructor, and this is commonplace in all self-defense, is when most people would run trainings for knife defense seminars, it would be, maybe 2 hours, maybe longer, but 9 times out of 10, it's like, hey, this is a specific defense for an overhand knife attack. This is a specific defense for a slash. There's a lot of these specifics that go into it. And even though they're great jump off points, which, I always thought in Krav Maga, they were great jump off points. The problem is when things get chaotic, you lose it. There's no A, B, C, D when it comes to surviving a violent attack of any sort, but especially with the knife. And to your point, Aaron, knives terrify the hell out of me. And that's one of the main reasons that we dove so deep into it, as we'll discuss, is every answer we had, we kind of hated, you know what I mean? And it was like, so how can we make this, even if it's incrementally better? There's never been a point where I've been like, man, this defense we're teaching, this is 100% guarantee, but it's like, how do we edge that out and make it as much there? So the KCC program originally developed, or at least this rendition of how we approach training, developed because I was teaching a personal protection group here in Columbus, Ohio, and I had them once a month. So I only had them for 4 hours a month. And, that's very common for types of in-service training or contracts that might come up with different programs and departments. And the problem with that is most of the time you train for that 4 hours and then those people are never going to train again. And then I would see them a month later and we made progress, but it wasn't a lot of progress. So I started thinking, like, how can I actually get them every 4 hours I spend with them to increase how much they digest? And Eric, I can only imagine, coming off of the summit, I know I felt the same way, but any seminar that you go to, I always say you're lucky if you actually walk away absorbing 10% of the material, like not just remembering I mean, like actually absorbing something that you put into practice. Usually if you go to an 8-hour day of training, you're lucky if you walk away with 10% of that you eventually will train, practice, own, and put into it. So I started looking at it and going like, well, how do we start figuring this out? So obviously we can simplify the curriculum, which is one of the things we lean into, which Craig also does in his programs. And he's very, very outspoken about, is instead of showing 1,000 techniques just to show you how good I am at this, what are the most practical things that we can address? So it was coming up with a simplified approach. What are the most common practical positions we find ourselves in and transitions that we need to get to? Okay, so that's one piece of the puzzle, is making the material short and simplistic. But the other end of the puzzle was, well, how do I get them to actually practice it? We all have jobs. I have, 2 kids. I have an amazing wife. I have a business to run. I travel around and I'm trying to continue to grow as a student. So if I'm already training 5 hours a week, I'm not going to add an hour or 2 additional hours on top of what I'm doing to actually get into it. So I started thinking, well, how can I get these people to start training relatively consistently, but also not make it a burden on them? So I started coming up with this idea that was like, well, if we can get a ton of repetitions, compress them into a flow drill style to get people to do a ton of reps against realistic energy in a short period of time, and then lobby it to them. That's like, look, if you're going to train anyway, just do this for 5 minutes as a warm up before your sessions. And now maybe I'm doing 5 minutes, 5 days a week, but it's top of mind every time I go into it. That's going to be a lot more impactful than doing 1 hour a month as it goes. It's like somebody that does dry fire reps, just before they get out of the house. It's like, hey, spend 3 minutes, do a couple of draws, get adjusted to your trigger. What clothing are you wearing? How do you need to adjust your draw for today to access your firearm? It takes 3 to 5 minutes versus, hey, I'm going to go to the range once every 2 months because it's expensive and cumbersome and a pain in the butt, right? So it's essentially the dry fire version of how do I get people to do that way. So I started to work with this crew specifically and coming up with these drills and lobbying that up to them. And I saw a ton of success. They started getting a high amount of repetition against live energy in a short period of time. And that got my wheels turning. So long story short, that brings us back to the question, like, what is KCC? So what we do is we address the entanglement first, because I think the entanglement is the most terrifying part. If you can just run, then just run. If you can, pull your gun out and you have the distance and you can use it, thumbs up. But if they're attached to me and they're already stabbing me and I don't have an immediate way to get away from them, I'm in an entanglement whether I like it or not, or at least I'm in a situation I can't leave. So I need to learn to jockey that. So our whole first program that we call KCC1, the Foundations of Control, is all about the entanglement. You're stuck in the entanglement, standing in on the ground for 11 hours. So we really hash that out. We give people the pressure positions, everything that they need to make that happen in the most practical positions that we found. And then more importantly, we teach them how to practice it in a short period of time so that when we leave, they actually have something drillable. And then on top of that, we created an online training program that they can literally have a direct resource to, so they're not missing anything. So everything they learned in the seminar setting, they have all of that information on that platform so they can actually train. So the mission statement at KCC is not only to resolve and solve the problem of the entanglement with the fight, but more importantly, to be able to grow and evolve the people once we leave them and they have an actual path to get better at it. And then from there, as we started diving deeper into the entanglement, if I've solved what I believe is the most complex, terrifying variable in the fight, which is I'm stuck in the entanglement. I want to learn to turn the tides of that. then I can stack everything else on top of it. And so the secondary program, KCC2 that we rolled out last year starts to say, okay, now I'm at a distance, the knife is getting drawn. What do my blocks look like? How do I implement my striking into that? And we start to expand farther out into shirt grabs, which is a piece of the puzzle you saw in the Combatives Summit, and going from there. But instead of creating this, hey, come to my 2-hour seminar and I'll teach you how to survive a fight with 5 easy steps or whatever a lot of people promote. It's like, hey, look, knives suck. The fight is going to be terrifying and it's super complex. Let me show you how to navigate the gray area of the entanglement. And then when you get good at practicing and drilling this repetitively over time, then you can start adding whatever it is you do. If you carry a gun, we can plug weapon retention, weapon access into this same exact program. If you're a striker, we can plug your striking in. We can start to create a holistic approach to dealing with the knife.
Well, Aaron, one of the things that I'd love about your program, and number one, you use a combat sports base, the wrestling base, jiu-jitsu base, control base, right? But like you stated, the KCC1 starts static, right? If I'm still using your current terminologies, there's every single time I show some form of a weapons defense, like, for an audience that's not as heavily in it. And I'm talking about folks that are heavily into jiu-jitsu that don't plug in weapons. You always get the, what ifs. And I've heard you talk about that before. What if they do this? What if they do that? And I think it's so important for individuals to understand that the what ifs are always going to be there. You cannot solve the what ifs right this very second in just this short amount of time, this 2 hours that you might have. And the flip side of that, Aaron, is that even you say you have that 2 to 4 hours or more, 8 hours, whatever amount of time that they have with you, is at a minimum, even if they don't know all the what ifs, you've given them the concepts and the capabilities to train and practice that even in that short amount of time, they're probably going to go home with understanding how to control somebody's limb, at least a decent amount. Well, am I capturing that thought process properly?
Yeah, I would say, for the what ifs, the way that we approach it is the KCC program, if you continue to train it. Right. So that's the biggest thing. I always tell people, like, I just left Chicago last weekend. I was in Austin, Texas the weekend before. And I tell everybody, like, listen, you're maybe 1% better at knife defense after this training. If you really want to get good at it, it's on you now. I've literally supplied you with everything I could possibly do with the time that was given to me. And more so, you can reach out to me anytime you want. Here's the online training program. But the fact of the matter is, it's up to you to keep training it. So if they continue to train it, KCC honestly is the formula that solves the what ifs, because it's not the knife is here, so I do this, or the knife is here, so I do this. It's a way to learn to feel movement, trace hands, track energy, and adapt to it if you put the time in. That's the most important part. And I don't care what program or system you do, the more time you put into it, the better you're going to be at executing it. So you're dead on. Like, you can pull whatever what ifs you want out of the pie here, but at the end of the day, it's going to come back to, okay, well, if I'm in the entanglement, which is our first, rendition KCC1 of the program, I'm navigating that energy no matter what. He could pull it here. He could switch to that. We get that all the time. What if he switches? What if he tries to hit you? All of that is packaged into understanding how to move through all these different positions and understand the SOPs with them. So really, we're teaching you how to learn the mathematics and equation to solve whatever what if you throw at it. Because no matter what you do, I can almost guarantee to 99% proficiency that we can answer the equation through the concepts that we're laying out. Now it's up to you to expose yourself to different energies. And I think that's the most important part of what we're doing, which also makes it decently hard to market, because most people want a definitive. They want to know when they leave after their 11-hour, $400 investment, maybe more so if they're traveling and have to get hotels and travel and all that type fun stuff. They want to feel like they leave and they're like, I got it. And I got to look at them and go, man, I've been doing this full time for 16 years and I don't got it. You know what I mean? Like, if some dude gets the jump on me with a knife, it doesn't matter how many hours I spend going into it. That's just the way that it is. And variables are variables. If I run into the one cracked out, 210 pound pan level brown belt that decided he wanted to stab somebody that day, I'm in for a hell of a fight. And there's no one technique or concept we taught that's going to make that any harder than it is. But the more training that I put into it, the more growth I have, the more exposure I put myself into, the higher the potential that I'll make the best possible choice in those split second moments as I'm putting myself in there. So, again, to surmise that, in our view, the KCC program, especially KCC 1, is the formula to answer all the what ifs. And then you put those what ifs into practice and into play.
Well, and Aaron, frankly, I think you're bringing to the forefront what some of us have, in this niche area of folks that work in, let's just say, the practical combatives realm, is that there is no just, hey, I'm going to learn this at a seminar and I'm going to be effective. What people don't like to hear in many cases, that all this shit takes work. It
a lot of work.
Yeah. And to be frank with you, and some of my more higher level firearms folks out there, listeners of our show, mentors of ours, may argue with this. But I think that the combatives piece just takes a lot more time to be effective as a shooter and have the requisite level of capabilities with being able to present the pistol on target and be able to execute combative accuracy. I just think it just does not take as much time as it takes to develop these combatives pieces.
Well, let me interject in that, because guys, we all know all of us have some firearms training with a pistol. A lot of the time, all that needs to be, now I know this is very general, but let's just bear with me. A lot of the time, what needs to be done is a fairly quick draw and a few shots on target in 3 yards or so. That's not a ton of training. You have to get that down. But when it comes to all this stuff, jiu-jitsu in general for me is still one of the things that blows me away. I'm just a blue belt, but I'm still blown away with the technical aspects of combatives is so much deeper and more difficult than people fathom. Even the guys that are really deep into it, it's just like, I gotta still keep rolling through this, testing this out, continually learning, and it's just never ending. But back to the firearms thing, like Eric said, there's just not as much time from a self-defense standpoint that you have to spend on the firearms, frankly.
Yeah, I would, to discuss along those lines, think about, instead of generalizing, this is the way that I would view it, in my opinion, at least. Instead of generalizing and saying like the gun stuff versus the combative stuff, take it out full view. If we look through the lens of self-defense isn't a technique. It's not a tool. Self-defense is an overall view. It's what am I trying to accomplish? And generally in those cases, it's in the words. It's taking care of yourself, right? Now it's going to encompass family and people you care about as well. But nonetheless, it's a lens. It's not a program or a resource or a technique, right? It's a very generic term. So look at it through the lens of self-defense and simply look at it, the situations where I can utilize my firearm the way the firearm was manufactured and intended to be utilized, which is at a distance. Then there's a subset of skills required to get that done. And in a self-defense scenario, at least from the statistics that we can pull and we've been exposed to, it's not a high level of skill there. Right now, the higher my level of skill is, the better and faster that I'm going to operate inside of that smaller subsect. Now, when we start getting into the range where, I would say 2 other ranges where the gun is on the gray line, whether it's the distance I'm supposed to be, or at least when the firearm was intended to be utilized, and then definitely not the distance the gun was meant to be at, which is in the clinch range. That's when different skills then come into play. And it's not necessarily that there's any less technique that needs to be drilled. It's that the proximity of being near the person takes away what the normal efficacy of a firearm is meant to be. So now you're using a tool inside, or attempting maybe to utilize a tool inside of a range that it wasn't manufactured to get into. You know what I mean? Like, outside of, you could make some arguments around like, well, you know, in close quarters, there's definitely some benefits to like a solid, you know, hammerless J-frame that doesn't have anything that can catch close or get jammed and all that kind of fun stuff. But you even just take that away. If I'm pointing and shooting at a target, moving or not, there's a lot less variables that I need to manage than if that target is within, let's say, 10 feet of me charging at me. And then even closer if they're already grabbing onto me and I don't have my gun or in my hand just yet, right? And so then the skill set, the way that I usually lobby this up to people is, and again, this is just my opinion, I don't know that it's completely accurate, but the way my view goes into it is, by skill around shooting, I need X amount of marksmanship to make shooting well, right? Effective, right? As far as combat shooting, make sure that I don't shoot anybody I'm not supposed to, make sure I get the targets where I need to get them to get to. You know, there's X amount there. The most important part, or the most important skill sets, in my opinion, is how are the skills that I'm getting the gun in my hand with a strong and appropriate grip. And what ends up happening is that's a speed thing at distance, but as we start getting closer, that starts to then rub up against grappling skills, whether you like it or not. So now I need to have a subset of grappling just to get the gun in my hand, let alone to change the marksmanship. And those variables, the closer I get to somebody, are always going to be more chaotic. The grappling, wrestling in this case, the way that we kind of look at it, is really just the extra block. There's the block of how do I access the firearm? And then there's the block of grappling. And the complexity of it is that they're overlapped. If you really look at wrestling, in my opinion, and again, take in consideration that when you're in a BJJ school, you're rolling with other people that know BJJ. Now, there's obviously different levels of it, but you're still playing jiu-jitsu. You're not playing angry, drunk guy with a knife. You know, you're not playing domestic violence asshole, you know, husband. You're not playing, you know, knockout game kid that just is running up and punching people and doesn't have a training background. And that's not to say you shouldn't plan for somebody that has a training background, but we run into this oftentimes, at least in my experience, in different modalities, where we get enamored by the complexity of situations, and we don't realize that there's a solid chance that's not the energy I'm going to get in a real life fight. Yeah. Even in the case of our seminars, you know, and we make it a point to kind of send this out to people, is by the end of the seminar, one of the things that we do for KCC1 is we do what we call free flowing, which the person with the knife is going to stay in the entanglement. They're not trying to get out of the entanglement. And the person defending is not allowed to leave the entanglement. So they have to stay in the entanglement way longer than they should ever have to. But the person with the knife gets to post frame, pull shirts, stab, switch the knife into the other hand, and do whatever they want. And it's chaotic, and you can't win. It's like doing the final evolution in, you know, one of Craig's EWO classes. It's like you can do pretty well and you're not going to win because you're not allowed to leave Thunderdome. So it's the same thing. But people will run into situations where they get uber frustrated about like, wow, man, I couldn't get that position we were looking at and this and that. And they forget that the person they're dealing with just experienced the same exact 10 hours of training. So they know exactly what you're going to do. They know exactly what you're looking for. And you have to take that in with a grain of salt with that. Somebody who spends time and learns how to use head position really well and aggressively is going to shut down a ton of untrained individuals and just completely mess with them. Somebody that understands the mechanics of head position and how to find the hands and get outside of the elbows is going to shut them down even more. Somebody that understands how to, you know, find the hands and get outside of the elbows and use their head for good head pressure, but then also understands like position and angles, is going to shut people down. It's not the complexity of wrestling jiu-jitsu that is like 10,000 techniques that I could potentially do. It's understanding how to aggressively utilize these certain skills in very matching violent ways to shut people down that have never exposed themselves to that type material in a lot of cases. And then, yes, the bigger the individual is, the more skill I have to have, the more skilled the individual is. Those are all just attributes, and I need to match those attributes the best way that I can, right? But for as complex as fighting can be, honestly, in most cases, it's the lack of exposure to contact and violence that equals the complexity. You know what I mean? It's not really, oh, this is uber complex. I get smashed. I'm a white belt and I'm getting smashed by brown belts. Like, well, of course you are. It's supposed to be that way inside of that rule set. But when you go out and you have, like you said, Aaron, you're a blue belt. If you have blue belt level experience, you distill it down to positional concepts and then you elicit violence, you're already ahead of a lot of people just because you've spent time in that close personal space with another person trying to break your freaking limbs off. And that in and of itself, if trained enough, is going to start to slow things down because, if you want to use a fancy term like inoculation, you're starting to get used to that type of stress. And so it's a higher likelihood that if a bad situation happens, it involves you being close to somebody, that you'll get your gun out, not because you have this multitude of technical background, but because you have spent time fighting people, right? And a lot of time fighting people. So it might not necessarily be new. Now, Eric, to your point you made earlier about you take jiu-jitsu guys and you give them a weapon and kind of all of a sudden they are awkward. They don't really know how to do the things they're normally supposed to do. For them, that's that's a context and a variable they're not used to.
Yep.
You take a jiu-jitsu person or a wrestler, to be completely honest, I think wrestling is superior to jiu-jitsu when it comes to self-defense. And we can talk about that and discuss that.
Yep.
Jiu-jitsu is more commonplace. I can throw a rock in any given direction in any podunk town and I'll probably find a jiu-jitsu studio, right? Or at least within an hour drive. But when we talk about it, you take a good wrestler or a good grappler, and then you start to expose them to weapons, they will close the gap way faster than somebody that doesn't already possess that exposure to the close personal contact of fighting. It won't take me long to take a blue belt, start to train them in knife stuff, for them to figure out what works, what doesn't, and to close that gap a lot faster. So again, to take this back to what we said about earlier, it's if I don't expose myself to the things, it's stress. It's crazy. It's chaotic. I don't understand it. It's like music. You guys are both musicians, right? It's like the first time you played drums, it was like, what the hell am I supposed to do with 5 different drums at once? But now all of a sudden, you can listen to a brand new song that you've never heard before for the very first time. And with, I don't know, probably let's even be nice and say 20 minutes, you could probably get 80% of the song played out relatively well without any tablature. And it's not because you're a whiz. It's because now you've gotten your body so coordinated with this is my kick, this is my snare, this is my hi-hat, this is where I position my toms, that you can start to link the what ifs together and start to figure that out. So you have shooting skill sets, you have grappling skill sets, you have weapon skill sets inside of grappling. It's in my opinion, I don't think it should be approached as this massively over the top, I need to know a ton of technical stuff. I think it's a lot of exposure, a lot of pressure, and a lot of eliciting violence and haste into a lot of those cases can solve a lot of problems. And then in the long run, I refine that stuff. But the problem I have with jiu-jitsu, or at least jiu-jitsu posing as self-defense, which could be a controversial kind of sentence there, but is that to get good at jiu-jitsu, the way people feel when they feel good at jiu-jitsu takes years. But if you come into my program and you take a 1-hour class and then you get attacked that night, I need you to have concepts and skills and whatever mindset that is going to get you as safe as possible every 1 hour I spend with you. And that is less likely to come through overly technical proficiency, and that is more likely to come through allowing somebody to get 500 shitty aggressive reps, that they just start getting their body in those positions and starting their body against another person trying to get into it and start to get that exposure. So I know I kind of went 5 different directions with that, but I get weary when people when they have a tendency to want to like dive into the overly technical sense of a lot of different things, when realistically, man, like I could take somebody in a month and just teach them down and dirty head position and drilling through flows and going and moving. And honestly, they could resolve a lot of the situations that we commonly see through video from untrained attackers, from what I've seen. Right. And that's just my thoughts on it. I know, Eric, you've been waiting to say something. I'm excited.
Oh, no. You're good, brother. I love it. And I don't think you were going multi different directions at all. I think it's all concise and congruent. What I will add to that, and I want to digress 1 second for any of our audience members out there regarding the firearms comments earlier, is that I think myself, my brother Aaron, and then Aaron Jannetti sitting across from me, we believe in having a higher standard of skills with firearms.
100%.
I'm not at all saying that that it is easy to attain requisite. It still takes work, but we also believe that we need to perform at the highest level we can in shooting as well. So I want to make sure that I put some clarity there.
100%.
Now on that note, I am not necessarily striving to become a GM in USPSA either. But the point is that we believe in a high standard when it comes to firearms, and we believe that's deeply important. Just in case there's some new listeners that came on, and
sorry if I was a little too.
No, Aaron, I was the same way, Aaron. I was.
My point just is that I do know. Yes, I've been shooting way longer and have way more time on the gun than jiu-jitsu, but I just do know that it really kind of comes down to what you said, Aaron, that I like your approach, and it makes it less daunting to me, especially when it comes to the knife stuff, that we're always talking about high percentage, highly successful techniques and stuff. That's the same thing that I'm really speaking about when getting a pistol out in a normal kind of situation. But yeah, I'm trying to get my master in IDPA here pretty soon, but my freaking tennis elbows kind of slowing me down. But
it's rough, man. You put that many rounds down range and like loading and everything that goes in it. I mean, I don't think people realize like how much wear and tear on your arms, your shoulders, your body that like consistent shooting takes. Most people, we kind of go out, we shoot a little bit here and there, and it's like, yeah, it was kind of rough, but it's like, yeah, okay, but now do that a lot. And then tell me your hands aren't jacked up and your elbows don't hurt.
And when you're dry firing for 5 or 10 minutes and you're tired, that's when you're getting some work done. And on the note of guitar playing, I'm kind of annoyed every time I go shoot because I come back and want to play guitar and my fingers are kind of scuffed up. It's like, I feel a little dainty.
Yeah. I think the biggest thing, like if you have to surmise anything with, and I think this is with anything. I mean, really, like we were talking before we got on, about, I played drums growing up. And you were like, what are your influences? And I was like, I don't know, man. I was an angry kid and I was just beating the shit out of a drum set. But I think a lot of it early on is like, how much time are you going to put in? It's not that I don't have any desire to be the highest level, like a grandmaster in, firearms, or, a 7th degree black belt in jiu-jitsu, but that just, no matter what, I don't care who you are, that's going to take time, So if I go in with the intention of being a highly skilled firearms, like a user, somebody who shoots, then let's say I have arbitrary numbers. Let's say I have 10 hours a week. Well, then I get to spill all 10 hours a week into becoming a refined shooter. But if I walk through the door and I say that my objective is to protect myself and my family, and I still only have 10 hours, I got to do more than just shoot. So that's where early aggressive, like, this is a common thing, but there's a really good book called The One Thing, another really good book called Essentialism, but it really boils down to like, what is the one thing in my life, if I made a quick down and dirty assessment, what's the one thing that if I improve it will make the biggest impact and might actually make other things, less necessary or less daunting, to use one of your words, which was great. In a piece to that can come down to like, okay, I want to learn to defend myself. And the first thing might be just physical fitness. I mean, end of story, right? And it's like, listen, you can go shoot as many rounds downrange as you want, and you can go take jujitsu. But, I made this analogy on a podcast the other day. It's like I have 2 kids, they each weigh anywhere from like 35 to 50 pounds. And if I need to pick them up and run somewhere to defend them, which is part of personal protection and self-defense, okay, cool. Like you can shoot downrange pretty well. And, maybe you have a decent jujitsu game, but like, how's your 200-meter sprint while carrying a 50-pound weight? You know what I mean? Which is probably a 50-pound weight panicking if I'm trying to save their life. And it's like, there's a certain degree to understanding those skill sets. So you have the physical skills. If you're going to use a tool like a knife or a gun, then you have the knife and gun skills. And then if you're going to do combatives, you have the combative skills or the open hand skills. And if I had 10 hours a week, and I mean, let's be real, that's really generous for a lot of people. I mean, 2 hours is a stretch for most adults to have a week. So now all of a sudden you have 2 hours of training a week. It's like, well, what's more important, 2 hours a week on the range or, a 1 hour fitness class, followed by maybe a little bit of dry fire at home and then a combatives class later on? Like what's going to solve the majority of the problems? Because the other problem, the other thought around a gun, I don't want to call it a problem. I think it's a mindset shift. The other thought around the firearm is a vast majority of self-defense situations can be managed and mitigated without a gun, period. And to be completely honest, take away legally justified, but morally justified. A lot of them, I don't even want to solve them through a gun. Like, I don't think a lot of people understand that what then comes with the shooting, if I could have avoided it, like the psychological side of it, the financial issues I might run into, potentially, ending up with civil suits. And then you have the legal side of things. It's a lot of garbage to get into it. Some dude, steals my bag and runs off with it. It's like, am I going to waste X amount of money on this, and that because I just want to shoot the guy, even if it's justified or not? It's like, so then if my only skill set is in this one bucket, now I have a situation that needs another bucket. It's like, come on, and then in the reverse of that, okay, well, I refuse to carry a weapon. It's like, okay, you have this combative skill, but if you never train with a weapon and you find yourself in a situation where that is the answer, this is literally the difference between me getting home to my kids and my wife, you're not going to at least think about what it might take to carry a firearm and to utilize a firearm and, potentially even just use a blade and what that goes into it. It's like, you can't, if you're looking at self-defense, you have to respect all of it. You have to respect the verbal side, which, Craig does such an incredible job with his muck. Absolutely. But you have to respect the verbal side, the social skills. You have to respect the physical fitness. You have to respect the open hand skills. You have to respect the weapon skills, like utilizing of the weapon, so edged weapons, potentially blunt objects, as well as firearms. And you have to respect the medical side. And on top of that, if I throw like a 6 bucket into there, you have to respect the psychological and emotional side of things for both you and potentially your family members. That's a huge part of it. And that's holistically looking at self-defense, in my opinion. If you put all your eggs in one basket, that's fine. It's a personal choice. That's fine. But you have to at least respect that you're missing components. It's like, I don't care if you're like, look, man, I'm never going to carry a gun. I think they're terrible and, whatever. It's fine. That is fine as long as you understand that that's a choice and you are voluntarily limiting at least a section of potentially defending yourself. That's fine. So then build a plan around this. Vice versa. Hey, man, I don't really want to learn how to wrestle and fight. I plan on solving my problems through these things. It's like, okay, except that if these situations show up and you haven't taken the time to learn those skill sets and it goes poorly, that was a choice. That wasn't anything outside of that. It's like you made a choice to ignore this skill set and things happen. And in that case, it's like there's a personal responsibility. So in my opinion, if self-defense is a legitimate priority, no matter what your personal beliefs are or your desire to avoid discomfort, you make a choice on what you're getting done. And at the end of the day, if you made choices leading up to whatever that violent situation was, and it was a skill set that you specifically chose not to pursue, not because of ignorance. If you didn't know, you didn't know, and that's fine. But if you were ever exposed to it and you chose not to, or at least to be open to it, well, then, you made a choice there. And that's a hard pill to swallow for a lot of people. And it's real. I mean, that's how life works, so.
Awesome, Aaron. Man, you're just dropping a lot of excellent knowledge bombs that people need to hear. Succinctly describing what people need to focus on, in excellent detail. So our audience, no doubt, will get a lot out of this. I will say so. I don't know how well we can do this for, the little bit of time we have left here.
Sure.
But can you kind of cover some key concepts, maybe a few or so that a person's gonna learn or drill during, KCC? I mean, is that something you think we can do here on the air that will be worthwhile?
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things that's like, we'll talk about them, we'll shoot through them, and at the end of the day, exposure to them is what matters.
And Aaron, before we go before that, I will say, for our audience members out there, Aaron has put up a lot of excellent video content of a lot of his concepts. So if it's okay with you, Aaron, I would like to post to our show notes your video list that has, a lot of the key. Is that cool?
Yeah, that's fine. And to be honest, if people are interested, I'll throw a coupon together just for the podcast. And if anybody wants to look into the online program, they can get a discount for that. So I'll send you information on that. It'll be specific for your listeners.
Awesome. Cool.
Yeah. So as far as baseline concepts go coming into it, we're teaching people how to navigate the body, navigate the entanglement, and we do it in a specific case of what's going on. So the first hour, honestly, we front load the vast majority of our concepts. One concept is going to be the basic idea of the hands are what kills you, right? We talk about this a lot in self-defense. So we start talking right out of the gate about the importance and awareness of where the hands are at, how to track the hands, and how to access the hands. So we start right out of the gate with hand fighting drills. So concept number one is you should be building training around knowing how to track the hands, find the hands if necessary, and then deal with them. And we start in very primal ways with that, literally just grabbing and fighting as far as that goes. Another concept that we'll get into is understanding that, we break it down into zone 1, zone 2, zone 3. For people that can see, that's one thing. If you can't see, I'll explain it to you. But if I'm staring you face to face and I am chest to chest with you, not necessarily touching, but facing, and your hips are pointed at me, and I'm what we refer to as in between the elbows. So if my hands are up and posted and you're picturing that, the space in between the elbows where my chest is at, if I'm looking forward, that's where I have the most strength, dexterity, vision, all that kind of fun stuff. So fighting me in the front is going to be the hardest. So we refer to that as zone 1. Fighting in between the elbows or directly in front of your attacker is going to be the hardest. If I can get just outside of their elbows, we refer to that as zone 2. I start to cut down some of their options. They lose some of their vision, some of their dexterity, some of their strength, some of their options. If I can get behind the body, right, so all the way behind them, we refer to that as zone 3. Just imagine a plane cutting the body in half from north to south, and I'm behind that plane. That's zone 3. Fighting them back there, they have the least options as far as it goes. So right out of the gate, we start teaching, okay, your drilling should be based around attempting to get outside. And this is basic fighting. You'll find this in kickboxing, boxing, even martial arts or Eastern martial arts, but definitely into grappling as well, is taking angles, right? Another concept is going to go into it when we're stuck in the entanglement is understanding head position. Craig also does an absolutely phenomenal job of doing head position drills. In fact, so much so that we steal, one of his primary drills right out of the gate. But if I want to control the side of the body, or if I want to control a side of the body, I want to control the head space. So I want to learn how to drive my head into the side of the body I'm controlling. We also operate on the inverse of that, which means whatever side of the head or the side of the body I do control the head space, I have the highest likelihood of controlling that arm. On a weapon side, this brings us to our next concept, which is kind of double down, is that I don't need to control the weapon to control the weapon. Right. So for instance, if I grab you by your head and slam your face down into the floor, I don't need to touch the knife for you to occupy your brain with, I don't want to get slammed into the floor. That's a pretty exaggerated example, but it's a big example there. So those two come together, right? Which is, okay, if I can't get, let's say the attacker has a knife in the right side. If I can't control the headspace on the right side of the body, but I can control the headspace on the left, then I might simply want to work on controlling the body on the left side. And that can enter me into my split seat belts and getting around the elbows on the outside of the support side. So things like that. So even just from a grappling perspective, those are 4 very big primary things right out of the gate. So first and foremost, control the hands or know where the hands are at. Secondly, understand that if I fight somebody directly in front of them, that's going to be the hardest. So anytime I can take an angle or get behind them, that's the best. Understand controlling the headspace on the side of the body that that we want to actually get into. And then with that, another thing is I can control the blade without controlling the weapon arm or the weapon limb. And then kind of more meta things that we talk about is, first and foremost, a big concept is I don't necessarily want to be defensive about my grips. I want to be as offensive as possible. So I don't want to think I don't want them to grip me. I want to think I want to own the position and get the grip. And that's a mindset change when it comes to being stuck in the entanglement. And then, the last one, we'll throw like a 6th one out here, is if I can regulate breathing even to a semblance, a little bit more than I would normally do in a stressful situation, I have a higher likelihood, a higher potential of making good decisions. So we start teaching basically the difference between, or the association between, inhales and your sympathetic nervous response and exhales and your parasympathetic nervous response. So concept number 6 would be, whenever possible, try to exhale longer than you inhale. So again, we know box breathing, right, is like 4, 4, 4, 4, but other versions of that is like inhale for 4, exhale for 6. For us, we keep it very general. It's like, look, if you're panicking, inhale for 1, exhale for 3. I don't care. Inhale for 2, exhale for 3. As long as your exhales are longer than your inhales, you're helping to kind of down regulate the best you can in any stressful situation. And that helps for learning inside of a training setting. That helps to kind of slow things down, and that helps for decision making as it goes. And so there's a couple extra, other concepts that we're going to run into as we drill. But in the first hour, we drill all of those 6 concepts that I just went into heavily and actively. So for 60 minutes of training, for the first 60 minutes of training, they'll be moving their bodies at least 46 of those minutes while they're practicing those concepts, not just talking about them.
Man, I tell you, Aaron, again, I've been exposed to some of your content. Obviously, it was not a whole lot of time. And we also kind of, you would probably agree, we jumped to some of the concepts of using the clothing, which is further in your program. But man, when I asked for some key concepts, man, you delivered big time. I
would
can't
hope
wait.
so. The program's called Knife Control Concepts. If I don't have the concepts down, I might be missing something.
Yeah, and really, what I should clarify on is just, man, you just brilliantly articulated it here in a setting that sometimes can be difficult. So excellent.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks.
Yeah. Well, cool. Well, I think, man, I think for, given our audience an understanding of KCC, I think, man, that is a good digestible level, unless there's anything else you want to hit on. Otherwise, we can kind of move on to a couple of other topics.
No, man, that's fine. We hit a lot of really good stuff, so I'm at peace with it. I love it. I could talk for hours on this, obviously, as you could tell, man. So
again, I can't wait to take KCC, and I'm sure Aaron is balking at that opportunity as well.
Yeah. Most definitely. I would love for it to be held at your joint, Eric, and then I get to have an excuse to go hang out with you for a week.
See,
that's certainly absolutely being worked currently as we speak.
Well, gentlemen,
go ahead, Aaron.
Before we go too much further, let me go ahead and mention one of our sponsors, which is a new sponsor, and that is Training Ground, and that is actually where I train jiu-jitsu. My coach is Matt Reyna. Just an excellent gentleman.
Shout out to Matt.
He has created a great environment for all levels of practitioners, and there's so many modalities that are offered under the Training Ground family. And that, of course, includes Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and then all the way to firearms, which I'll be happy to say that I'm the primary instructor under the Training Ground umbrella too, and Evo Set classes are offered through them. But just wanted to quickly mention them, giving them a shout out. Go and check them out if you're in the Tulsa, Oklahoma area, pardon me. And their website is thetrainingground.life. Go check them out.
Woohoo.
Awesome. Yeah, man. Matt, Aaron just had Matt on when I could not be on the show, and it was an excellent, excellent discussion. And
Awesome.
Shout out to Matt. He's an incredible, humble, God-fearing, God-loving person. He's a good dude. Well, with that said, Aaron, so let's talk real quick. Let's hit on a little bit of your current firearms focus, if you want to talk on that a little bit. We're just curious.
Yeah, sure. So I've taught firearms courses. I still teach them for my people here at the gym. And in that same regard, I don't attest to be, like the guy running around teaching firearms courses. I have a really good amount of knowledge on it. I'm a again, in the humblest way I can, I'm a good teacher. I can take information and present it relatively well, and I want to have that access here for people, at our gym. So I'll run a program once or twice a year, for our people. Now myself, I carry, whenever legally possible, and and also when it makes the most sense. Now I run a training center, training gym, and I live my life in sweatpants, and in certain situations it would be less than desirable to carry in certain ways. So then I have, everyday carry the other way with like knives and such. But as far as training goes for me, I do a ton around the gym here. We have targets and things set up where I'll get a lot of inert training. So, we've got force on force pistols, that we run a couple different versions of Glocks, both through like the UTM platform, which, unfortunate with what's going on with that right now. But luckily, I have a stockpile of a couple hundred rounds that I can still go through. And then also with force on force. And then we have a ton of cert pistols. So I do a lot of my routine consistent training is going to take place here at the gym. So I'll put on a belt and holster and practice, reloads and drawing and shooting and things like that as much as I can. It's inert and I understand the limitations of it. And then personally, I try to get to the range. I mean, I'm going to be honest. I'm the guy that gets out and actually gets live fire in like maybe once a month, maybe once every 2 months.
That's still way more than the majority of firearms owners. So
yeah. And it's for me, again, we have lives, and that's the one thing that I appreciate and respect about everybody that is doing any training is that, schedules are tough. It's just, where do you prioritize your time? I keep myself as sharp as I can with as much inert training and hands-on, doing a lot of scenarios and force on force with the guys here at the gym, guys and gals. So, I'm getting training in. It's a very different style of training. But I get out and I do live fire whenever I can. I try to hit at least one class a year. I didn't get out to one last year, but in previous years, I had gone to two field craft survival ones, and I had made it to ECQC, so I'd gotten some live fire refreshers with Craig. And then, last year it wasn't really a course, but I did shoot a round of drills down in Charlotte with my friends at Fit to Fight. So I make sure that I'm getting exposure to other people, and I'm always trying to be a student with that as well. But yeah, I mean, I carry anywhere that I can. I understand the importance of it. I also understand, the liabilities of it. And I train in that regard. So.
Awesome. And I would say, you're humble. I would say that from what you espoused, all your dry practice, inert practice, getting out once a month, once every couple of months, and getting, training in, with other professionals. Yeah, you're doing more than 99.9% of most gun owners. And we're not beating up on gun owners at all, because we love that. That it's just a simple truth. If we look at the general cross section of society, we know, from some of the research that Carl Wren's done and a few others that, it's less than 1% that actually train. And I would say that even in that 1%, the folks that even take it to the degree that you do is far less. So no, that sounds like you're putting in the work for certain. Real quick, what is, we like gear every now and then. It's not a huge emphasis sometimes, but what is your typical carry rig when you are carrying?
Yeah. So during like spring, summer, I'll carry either a Glock 48 or just last year, I started carrying the P365 XL and playing with that. I like them both. The SIG's a little easier to conceal in certain ways. So that's always good. And then when winter hits, I mean, I'm in Ohio. So when I'm wearing jackets and hoodies and a little bit easier to cover some things, I'll usually either carry a Glock 19 or have a G45, not a 45 caliber, but a Glock 45 that still shoots 9mm, and I'll carry those around just so I have a better grip, a thicker platform, and then obviously a couple extra rounds never hurt anybody.
Yeah, it sounds like a good rig. And the 45 for folks out there is the Glock 17 grip profile, correct?
Yeah, it's a Glock 17 grip with a 19 barrel.
Excellent. Well, good deal. Well, Aaron, I think, we're getting kind of close to the end of the show. You want me to go ahead and hand it off to you, Aaron, for one of your favorite questions, and we can
this isn't my favorite. This isn't my favorite question. This is actually the most important question on the show with a new guest that is, of course,
and especially a musician.
Right.
Exactly.
Fair enough. Yeah.
So what are your 3 favorite bands and or musical artists?
Oh, man, that's tough. Like pulling it down to 3. I'll give you 3 I've been listening to a ton lately, or at least come up a lot. But I think you guys can respect and understand, like if you're in music your entire life, it's really hard to narrow it down to 3.
Oh, yeah.
Kind of depends on the mood I'm in, really, is what it comes down to.
We'll be clear that's just a starting point. We don't have hard and fast rules on that.
Yeah,
so you let it fly, buddy.
I love it. Top of mind right now. I've always been a huge Bob Marley fan. Bob Marley for life, as far as like that goes, like a real chill. I also have a very eclectic, wide range of things. Bob Marley's a big one right now. Well, not now, for a while. And then, man, the last probably about definitely like 6 years, I've been on a huge fan of a band called Manchester Orchestra. Like they're definitely a little bit bigger. I don't know how many people know who they are. But they've got they have a certain style, but they range a little more than some groups, which is really big for me. So I appreciate the hell out of Manchester Orchestra. I listen to them a lot. And then, oh man, gosh, that's tough. I'm trying to think of what I've been listening to lately. I got a record player for the first time in God knows how long.
Nice.
And so I started actually like picking up vinyl. And the coolest part about it was my mother had vinyl from when she was a kid, like 40, 50 years ago. And they're like original prints of like the Doors, Janis Joplin, Elvis, like original. Wow. It was the coolest discovery in the world.
Killer.
But I've been jamming out on a ton of the Police lately. I've been going back through a lot of their hits, so we'll throw them out in the mix as well.
Stuart Copeland.
Hell yeah! Oh yeah.
Yeah, he's influenced a lot of you and I, right?
Yeah. Well, dude, I saw them. I had the pleasure of seeing them live. Oh God, that would have been 2000, probably 7, like 2007. They came through Columbus, and Elvis Costello actually opened up for the Police. But one of the most incredible shows, that was like seeing him play live was gnarly, man. Like, yeah, but anyway, yeah, that was a good time.
Killer. Yeah. And, I sit and think about the influence of Stuart Copeland, a guy that, I think 2 of the biggest factors in his playing that influenced a lot of us. Number 1 is his drum sound, excellent drum sound. And then of course the mixture of rock and reggae feel, I think that's something that I really, really appreciate, and influenced guys like Adrian Young of No Doubt that kind of took on some of that persona too, which I also think is cool. But yeah, Stuart Copeland, man, huge influence. Well,
Okay,
go ahead, Aaron.
Bonus question because of what you do now. Okay, so it's either the answer you can answer one of two ways. What is your acoustic kit, or what's your dream acoustic kit? Whichever way you want to answer that.
Yeah, dude, I have an old like I'm not kidding you that I'm still playing the same kit that I got. My mother got me when I was in, good God, 8th grade. So that's, oh man, 30, I guess 20. How old are you in 8th grade? I don't even know. 20. It's got to be 25 years old, 26 years old. But it's an old Pacific. So like, and it was, man, I wanted this thing so bad. My mom actually like kind of tricked me into this place called the Drum Shop in Struthers, Ohio, a tiny little town. And I would go into the drum shop once a week. And I probably annoyed the shit out of those guys because I didn't have any money, so I wasn't buying anything. I just go in there and play for an hour and then leave.
Cool.
But they were cool dudes. But it's like it was promoted as like the color was like wine. And so like as you look over it and the light hits it in different ways, it changes from like purple to blue to red, like as it catches the light a different way. And it's, cool. I mean, I have pictures of me in jazz band with that drum set. I have pictures of me with the band I played with in college with that drum set. I got pictures of me with my kid, with that drum set. So yeah, it's an old Pacific one. But I mean, I see some of the newer, like the newer kits that I see, like some of the DW kits and things like that. I see a lot of the guys coming up with that. I would be like, man, if I had the money, like I would pimp out like a custom like DW kit of some sort.
Yeah.
Like big thick rims, like big thick wood rims and stuff like that would just be, but realistically, I always joke around like, my grandfather on my dad's side was also Jewish. So like, I feel like my budgeting and like penny pinching is like, my kit plays just fine. I've taken really good care of it. I replaced the heads. I do. So it's like, I look at it and go like, I'll never buy myself a new drum set, but I can dream.
Well, if you could, like Aaron said, if you could get one of the DWs, what kind of shells?
Oh gosh, I'm going to be completely honest, man. I'm so far, I haven't dove deep into it. I always tell people I'm like this with a lot of things, where I enjoy the practitionership and the understanding of how to operate, and I really know very little about the nuance type stuff. Like I joke around, like you talk about guns. The fanciest gun that I own, I bought off of a friend who decked it out. Otherwise, I don't know. Other than stripping it and cleaning it and putting it back together, I don't know. Like and I'll kind of look up there and go like, I shoot fine with a factory gun. Why am I going to change the trigger? Why am I going to do this? And I fully understand, for those of you listening that are higher in the world, I understand that like the triggers make a difference and like, all those different things. But again, like if I'm out with my family and I got to, get shots on target in a certain amount of feet in a realistic setting, like my factory Glock's going to do just fine. So I've never really dove deep into that. And drums were kind of the same way. Even when I got that Pacific kit, honestly, I only wanted the Pacific kit because it was pretty much a generic version of the DW, and I wanted a DW kit back then. You know what I mean? Like that's, and I wanted it because I saw somebody else who had it. So I've never really, that's been with anything, even with jiu-jitsu. Like people will be like, hey, did you see such and such competing and the way that he plays? And I'm like, who is that? Like I remember the first time I did like an over the shin ankle lock. And I remember being like, oh man, have you ever seen this done? Like this felt really good. And somebody was like, yeah, Coyoterra has been doing that for years. And I'm like, who is Coyoterra? Like I don't like, I'm so bad. Like I want to learn how to do it. I want to get really good at it. I want to learn how to teach people to do it. And I'm really bad about I don't ever choose to like dive deep into it. So if I'm being fully honest, I would go to somebody who knew more about it. I'd probably talk to you and be like, what's the difference in shells? This is what I want it to sound like. It's like what I do with my graphic designer. I'm like, listen, I have an idea. I have no idea what that idea is, but like, could you make this look really cool? And then she sends me something. I go, that's it. Nailed it. Like, that's perfect. It's like what it is.
Well, to be honest with you, Aaron, I've played, mid-level kits all my life. I've
Mhm.
had a few. Um, you know, frankly, I don't even have the top of the line kit. But Aaron can kind of attest. I had been eyeballing the kit behind me here is definitely was my dream kit for a long time, and it's a Thomas Star Classic
Yeah.
maple kit, and I've always loved the warmth, the projection, and sustainment of maple. And I still think, personally, I think maple are the best sounding shells. Now, it's not the newest greatest thing either, but I would say overall, I still think that most drummers will say a good maple kit is probably
Mhm.
where it's at. Babinga's getting really big. It does have some killer sounds. But yeah, I'm a maple guy, and the kit
Yeah.
behind me, I think about another kit at some point in my life, but you know what? I don't think I'll ever need one.
Yeah.
Well,
For the
let's be real clear. You know, that's Tama's flagship kit.
Yeah.
So, but bare minimum, you got that. Oh, dude, that's a killer kit. You don't need anything beyond that. And, dude, I don't need anything beyond. I'm looking for. Well, I don't need the 6 custom coals that I have, or I've just got a handful of my tube amps, and 2 of those amps were literally made just for me. Now, but I am there. There's a time. I mean, there's a continuum of if you're way too gear focused,
Mm.
or
Yep,
because
absolutely.
it would be way more important for you to be processed, music focused, or focused on shooting and not focused on the gear. But Eric and I have always had, and I believe, a healthy dose of gear. We just love gear.
Yeah.
But dude, when it comes to guitar, I practice usually at least 2 hours a day. I'm
Yeah.
50 years old. I wake up in the morning, practice. I take a guitar with me. I'm also an accountant. I take a guitar with me and I practice 30 minutes or so on my
Oh,
lunch
that's
hour. Then
awesome.
I'll come home. And so, in other words, I'm really into the gear, but I really freaking play too. So,
Yeah. Well, you earn that side of it. I think like, we were talking beforehand, like the height of me being very active with drums was like the tail end of getting out of college. So it's like I started in
mhm.
5th grade. I think like most people, your experience or your exposure comes from whenever the music department starts in your school. And for us, that was 5th grade. And honestly, I just started doing drums because I wanted to look cool. Like I was like, I'm gonna do band for sure. My brother and sister did it. And what's the coolest instrument? It's like, well, drums, obviously.
Oh yeah.
And then I really enjoyed it, and it's relieved a lot of stress. Like you get pissed off, there's nothing better than going in and breaking some sticks on a drum set. But so I think like I never got to a point where I was playing enough actively and also was like I deserve a better kit. You know what I mean? Like I was a college kid when I was playing, with the band that actually traveled around and did shows. And when I was, I told you I, did a small stint as a studio drummer. Like I was still in college. So you know what I mean? Like it was the tail end of me just right before I got out of college with it. Um, so like the last show I played at the Newport here in Columbus, which is, at the time was one of our bigger venues. And, that was on my birthday in 2007. You know what I mean? It's been that long since I've played like a show in front of people. And then 2009 was the last time, or no, early 2008 was the last time that I was in the studio playing for any backtracks. Right. So it's been, you know, 16 years or 15 plus years. And now that I actually appreciate semi finer things, I don't play as much as I used to. So it's a hard justification. Now, if I was practicing 2 hours a day, I would most likely buy myself a newer kit. I'd be into it. I'd feel like I'm getting the investment out of it. But right now, man, if I bought myself a new kit, I would literally be like, I'm going to touch this thing once a month tops. And I'm not doing it any justice. I'm not
Yeah.
playing like I did back in, 2008, 2010. So, but
Well,
man, if I
Aaron,
was, I would. But
I would say this: another kick-ass musician we had on the show too was one of my biggest influences as more of as songwriting is a guy named Jason Beeler from Saigon Kick. He, along the same lines, I asked him about his gear, and he goes, "Well, I've got this Paul Reed Smith I like. I don't even know what model it is. I just like the pickups, and there's a Fender around here somewhere." And dude, we're talking about an incredible guitar player, musician. So yeah, the gear isn't for everybody. So it's just fun to talk about, and it's fun to get everybody's perspective, and sometimes where they fall on that gear to application continuum.
100%.
Well, and Aaron Jannetti, that is that my brother is absolutely way more serious musician than I am. I mean, he talks about playing 2 hours a day. Now, I do play my drums most days, but I'll put it on average. I play probably 5 times a week. And frankly, some of the time that I play is dictated on how long my wife will if I'm doing a bunch of double bass stuff and a lot of fast, because I've been kind of getting back into playing some faster stuff and messing with some a little bit of older Metallica and some Slipknot stuff. And my wife, as gracious as she is about me playing drums, if I start playing a lot of that stuff, I'll eventually see a text pop in and she'll have the woman going like this.
See, I told you that's why I've secluded to an electric kit for that exact reason, because my wife would go nuts between my son and I banging on drums.
but to be honest with you, my wife is such a supporter of everything I do. And she does tell me if I'm not going crazy on some real fast stuff and whatnot, if I'm just playing, normal sticking patterns and, working on rudiments or working on some, because, I kind of split my practice into, I usually start warm up on rudiments. Not every time. And then I'll work a new stick pattern that I'm trying to perfect. And then I'll play along with music. And my practice is usually around 30 minutes, and my wife says sometimes she takes a nap on the couch when I'm playing, and she said she can go to sleep. So
that's awesome.
Well, guys, full circle. The main thing is, so let's just take it full circle to the fact that, dude, music's fun.
Oh yeah.
If you play an instrument, no matter what level it is, play it as much as you can and get some enjoyment out of it, because it does make life a little more fun when you can just, I freaking love practicing. I love performing, but if I still gig a couple times a week, but if I only do that because I have to perform. But when I pick what's my favorite aspect of music is practicing. I freaking love it.
Jamming out.
Yeah.
Gotta love it.
Well, so Aaron, one last question, and this is another gear, but this is circling back to knives.
Okay.
And I'm speaking specifically giving individuals that, want to train in, let's say they've never, had a class from a guy like yourself or Craig or, like right now I'm holding one of my knock knives that I have here. And of course I've got a one of my disciple trainers here. For our audience members out there that may be looking to get some trainers, what do you currently recommend to most people trainer wise?
Yeah. I put a video out a while back actually on this exact subject. Honestly, the cheaper and more accessible is perfectly fine. You can go on Amazon and buy, I think they're called Sharkies. But those are great. We carry those around the country with us pretty much everywhere we go. And they have a couple of different sizes, but they're accessible. You know, as long as you understand that the thing you're training with is a knife, for 90% of the training you're going to need, a little plastic one is perfectly fine. It doesn't need to be high end. Now, the video that I did literally specifically dove into, now you have these very, I want to hit certain things. Like for instance, that knock knife you have, similar to the tack knives that we carry around, like the orange peanuts.
Yeah.
And they serve a very specific purpose. They're compressors. They're made for me to be able to impact you pretty hard with it. So that we can get some pretty realistic energy as far as the speed and velocity of the stabbing and the intensity of it without injuring you. If I stab you with one of the Sharkies 100%, I get you in the ribs, that's going to hurt. Same thing with that metal trainer you have. Now the metal trainers, they create a little bit more realism and a little more sensitivity to it because it looks a little more like a knife, which psychologically has an impact in training. And it feels a little more like a knife, which psychologically has an impact in training. So if I'm looking to get the psychological edge, having a knife that looks a little more realistic can be a big thing for a lot of people, and people underestimate the psychological side oftentimes. Now, if I want to get some realism into not only being the one with the knife trying to stab somebody, but also the one taking the knife, then you can get into some nuancy type stuff like shock knives. Where you touch them, they give you a little zap, nothing too crazy, but you have it. And I think that one's twofold because one, it's an immediate response, and that response is not only like, oh crap, I got touched, but that response is like, ooh, and it actually kind of, if for most people, it's going to kind of want to pull you out of the fight, which can be realistic if there's a knife. Obviously, there's plenty of evidence that a lot of people get stabbed and don't even know they've been getting stabbed, which is a problem in and of its own right and should be addressed in training. But that said, but the other thing that a lot of people get away with knives is when they pull the knife and start stabbing somebody else, rarely are they cognizant of how often they put themselves in danger with their own knife when somebody's trying to not get stabbed by like fighting and wrestling them. And a shock knife will open that up pretty quickly, because the second that thing starts to come back towards your own face, or you feel it zap your own thigh, you go like, oh crap, like if that was a real knife, that would be me stabbing myself essentially. But that's nuanced. To be completely honest, 90% of your training could be done with a Sharky. Another really good one for, aggressive training that's soft, but also has a bunch of different stuff is Matt Clanton with Clanton Combatives. He's got some really cool, just different sizes and things like that, the downside of the tack knives and the knock knives, or the compressor versions of those knives, is that they're big and bulky and thick, which is not like a knife, right? So then you can get a little more aggressive practice with, let's say Matt Clanton's stuff. He's got different sizes and stuff with it. It still has a little bit of give because it's soft rubber, but it's also holding on to the knife in a way that it would actually be. It's a more realistic grip profile to kind of get into. So at the end of the day, for most people, like if you're just getting into training, jump on Amazon, in my opinion, grab a smaller blade first to start with, but maybe have one small blade, one bigger blade. But just like the simple plastic ones are perfectly fine for the majority of your training.
Awesome. Well said. I knew you'd be able to answer it superbly, because I figured that there are probably some audience members out there like, well, if I'm gonna get some training knives, what should I get? So I had to close with that.
Sure.
Well, Aaron Davis, do you have anything else for our esteemed guest?
I do not, other than I hope sometime soon to take a class that you teach, and my brother will be there, and because I know it'll be a blast.
Yeah.
In watching some of your material today, I was like, man, I need this stuff so bad. I mean, it's what I love, though, and it's encouraging to me, is that you're saying that it doesn't have to be as daunting as I'm maybe allowing myself to think. So that makes me excited to go learn from someone like you that starts off from that point.
Yeah.
So, and from me, man, thanks a lot. It's great meeting you. It's been a fun conversation, and like we always tell our guests, especially the ones that we're kindred spirits with, we turn you into repeat offender guests. So hopefully you'll want to come back soon.
100%. I'll come back anytime you want me.
Rock on, guys.
Well, you have a good evening, Aaron and Aaron. Great talking with you guys. Have a good evening.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
All right.